Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Get Into It with Gila. I'm Gila Glassberg, and today I have Alissa Rumsey. Hi, Alissa.
Hi.
How are you today?
Good. Sorry. Hold on one second.
No problem.
My mouse just went out and now it's not letting me. Sorry, it's not letting me X out your recorded, so I can't see you at the moment.
No problem. Take your time.
Sorry. I was working in a different office this morning, so I just did my
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do?
Sure. So, oh my gosh. I'm sorry. Now my microphone is not connected. You're set. Promise we're ready now.
Okay, great. Go for it. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you live? What do you do?
So I am a weight inclusive registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor, and the author of the book Unapologetic Eating. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, where I have a virtual nutrition practice. So my team and I primarily work with people to help them get free from dieting and reconnect back with their bodies and really find their way home to their bodies. So we do a lot of work with folks on their relationship to food and their relationship to their bodies. And then what it looks like when they're listening to their intuition and reconnected to their body from a food aspect, but also from all other aspects, whether it's movement, relationships, all these other things in life too.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you, in your practice, do you only have dietitians, or do you have more of therapists? And are you doing that?
So right now it's only dietitians. I am in New York, and unfortunately the New York laws around businesses actually don't allow you to have people that are not dietitians as part of your practice. So I have a pretty big referral network of therapists. So we work closely with a lot of therapists. I always feel like folks do so well when they have both a dietitian and a therapist on their team, because certainly, my goal is always to help people get to the root of what's going on with their relationship with food and their bodies. Because often, it presents as like, oh, I have this problem with food, or I can't stop eating X, or, all of these things. And that's what's kind of presenting at the surface, but then really digging underneath to figure out where that comes from. And sometimes some of the stuff that's revealed there is really helpful to have a therapist to dig into that more.
Definitely. I see that also in my practice. I know one of my supervisors is always like, tell your client, take a little sticky note and write it down and bring it to their therapist. I do that a lot. Of course, I'm here to be empathetic and listen, but sometimes two different lanes. Okay. So were you always a size inclusive dietitian, weight inclusive dietitian, or is that something that evolved once you became a dietitian and then you switched to the intuitive eating model?
Yeah. So I was not always. I was trained in weight-centric model, unfortunately most dietitians still are. And yeah, I've been a dietitian for, oh my goodness, 14 years this year. Wow, 14 years this year. And yeah, actually what brought me to decide to go to school for nutrition was I had started dieting in high school and had my own disordered relationship with food and body image struggles. And so, yeah, my training was all weight centric, weight normative. And then after I did my internship, I actually got a job at a large teaching hospital in New York City. And I think that was part of what helped my own relationship to food, because I was working mostly in the intensive care units. So doing at that point, you're really concerned about getting enough nutrition into people. And so, of course, there's still weight bias present, but it's not as much day to day. And I wasn't, quote, helping people lose weight. That wasn't my role in my job for over 6 years. And so I think it helped me get a little bit of distance from that. And then after about 6.5 years, I left the hospital to start my own business. And at the time, I thought I was a non-diet dietitian because I didn't subscribe to specific diets. I was like, no, diets don't work. But I was still doing, portion sizing and these things that I soon realized is still sneaky kind of dieting and still an external kind of locus of control.
Right.
So it was about 5 or so years ago now that I stumbled upon Evelyn Tribole's intuitive eating, like a 6-week training that she has. Hadn't even read the book. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting, and signed up.
Were you looking for training? Were you like looking for other ways to help with your clients? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah. So I was looking actually for training in mindful eating. I didn't know anything about intuitive eating. Funnily enough, I had taken the book out of the New York Public Library like over a decade prior, but didn't get around to reading it before it was due back. So I'd never read it. And so I was looking for trainings on mindful eating and like counseling with clients. And then I stumbled upon that intuitive eating one. And I vaguely remembered that a friend of mine did work in intuitive eating. And I'm like, oh, I think this is similar to mindful eating. And so I signed up having no idea what I was getting myself into.
That's so funny.
Yeah. And then I'm not sure if you've done that training, but like,
yeah,
like the first session, she goes into all the weight science and introduces health at every size, which I had also never heard of. And it blew my mind. Like in some ways it made so much sense and just like clicked immediately of like, oh yeah, this is exactly what I was seeing with my clients. It was related to my own experience with dieting and weight. And on the other hand, I was like, how have I been a dietitian at this point for like 8 years and never learned this? So it was a huge wake-up call for me.
Yeah, totally. I had a similar experience. I've only been a dietitian for like 6 years now, but I never heard about it in all my training. And there's a lot of years of training. And it's like when somebody tells you about it, you're like, what? Like, shouldn't this be like part of our schooling? And like you said, like most schools still don't teach with the intuitive eating model. I mean, I do think it's getting better, but like it's crazy. Like when you read it and you said you had your own experience with dieting, you're like, wow, like this is exactly what happened to me, you know?
Yeah.
Did I ask you when you said you started dieting when you were 14, like what spurred that? Where did that start?
So it started, I was sort of like mid high school. So yeah, I was probably like 15, 16. And I had played sports all my life and was always in a thin body and never thought about food, like ate whatever I wanted and had a lot of, thin privilege that way. And also, because I was in a naturally thin body, I didn't experience any weight stigma. I wasn't, told to go on a diet. And then in high school, I had stopped playing basketball and around the same time kind of like was going through puberty and started gaining weight. And which I now know is completely normal when you're going through puberty, and was like totally normal weight gain. But of course, living in this culture that we do, I panicked. And ended up going to Weight Watchers with my mom, actually, for a bit. And then that kind of started me down. I also started working out at a gym, and there was a trainer there, very friendly guy, but also very into diet culture. And so that just kind of like snowballed into stuff. And this was in the early 2000s. So nobody I knew was dieting. Like healthy eating was like not culture was like not really a thing. And there was definitely a part of me that liked the attention I got for like eating healthy, quote unquote, from my high school friends, because no one else was really doing that. So it started to actually become, even before I went to college to become a dietitian, it started to become like part of my identity as well, of like, oh, Alyssa's the one that quote unquote eats healthy and exercises all the time, sort of thing.
I really relate to your story a lot, because I also became really into that in high school. And like that was, it was a thing when I was in high school, but like I took that with me into like, we study abroad. A lot of us study abroad after high school. And like, that was like, Gila is the healthy one, and like, it really does become a part of your identity. So I really relate to that. So that's what spurred your love for nutrition, I guess. Like, that's why you wanted to become a dietitian.
Yeah, it was partially that, it was kind of during that time period. And then my senior year of high school, I took biology class, and learning about, I was always good at science and math, like science and math brain, but I never liked it. And taking that biology class and learning about digestion, I just found it so fascinating, and found like how the human body, like learning how the human body worked, so fascinating. even apart from the diet culture lens, but then of course I was, in diet culture at that point. And so, I was applying to colleges undecided, and then found out there was, you could major in nutrition, and ended up going down that route from there.
Right. Like so many of us, like we're all on a diet. So we decide to become a dietitian and we just feel like, oh, this is a perfect fit. And then it's like we learn about intuitive eating and we're like, oh, we had disorder eating. Like we were really like struggling. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such a funny thing, right? Because I wanted to become a dietitian because I loved talking about nutrition and exercise. And it's so funny now because, I joke that my clients and I barely talk about nutrition, and, certainly not the way in which I used to, or the way in which I was trained. But that's really what spurred me. I was like, oh, I love that people are asking me questions about this, oh, I can do this as a career.
Yeah, totally. I totally relate to that. So, actually I wanted to ask you this. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but like I think that like I've recently spoken in schools and been asked to come speak to like middle school kids, high school kids, and like some of my friends who are, let's say, dietitians or therapists, um they don't think we should even be talking to kids about nutrition. I wonder what we could do better. Like if there is something that we could do better that we could educate. I have 3 kids, so I teach them about nutrition, but I also they already have learned about weight stigma from school,
Mhm.
from the media, from all the people around them who mostly talk about dieting and how foods are good and bad. But like, how do you think that us as dietitians, like we could remedy that by showing up and still teaching good nutrition practice, but not, engaging in diet culture?
Yeah. So I do not have children. I have a 5-year-old twin niece and nephew. So it's certainly
Oh,
been
cute.
exposed to, to them, and kind of feeding through that way. But, and it's also not my specialty area, but something that I was thinking about as you were saying that, because I've also done some, like teaching at like different levels of schooling. And something that I cannot remember who I saw say this, but it's some dietitian that like specialized. She's a weight inclusive dietitian and specializes in like childhood, working with kids. And something she said was, from a development standpoint, kids' brains are very black and white, and it's hard for them to find nuance. So she gave the example of, I can't remember if it was her kid or kid in her, or her kid's class, who like they learned that carrots had a lot of vitamin A. And so the kids started eating carrots, and one day they didn't eat carrots, and they were like, Mom, oh no, I'm going to be deficient. And like
Right.
thought something was going to happen to them, right?
Right.
Because they don't
Right.
understand the nuance. So that was really eye-opening to me, because at that point I would have been like, yeah, it's fine to teach through like a all foods fit lens and still teach some nutrition. But that was really eye-opening to me. And I think that was like, she was talking about 8 to 9-year-olds like still lack this nuance. So I think we do have to be really careful about like teaching nutrition specifics to elementary school age kids. I certainly think, like you mentioned, talking about, when I have spoken to groups that age, I spoke to a friend of mine teaches 4th and 5th graders, and I spoke to them last year. And like you said, they've already internalized a lot of these messages. So I felt like a lot of what I was doing was trying to, take the morality out of food. And, a lot of them were, again, 4th and 5th graders, and they were like really scared to eat certain foods because they had learned about like GMOs and some other stuff. And so I felt like so much of my role there was trying to put it in perspective.
Mhm.
And I think that speaks to, again, they were already learning this, and like with the lack of nuance, it's hard for them to like hold that in their heads. It becomes, already as humans, we're very all or nothing, like very
Right.
binary, right?
Right. Right.
So yeah, and I certainly think, you know, helping kids kind of just be able to listen to their own cues, normalizing that bodies come in all sizes, talking about things like that. And then certainly as kids get older, kind of talking about from the like understanding more about diet culture, I think is really helpful, and sort of the messages they're getting and how those are maybe not such great messages or such helpful messages.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I spoke in a school maybe like 2 or 3 years ago. It was middle school kids. I think it was sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. And like my presentation was mostly on like hunger, fullness, like the hunger fullness scale. And very general nutrition, which I like. I always find myself saying this to clients, like fruits, vegetables, some whole grains, adequacy, like, protein, carbs, and fat. And they're like, is that all? I'm like, kind of, like I know that's, and I have, I work with Jessica Setnick, does like eating disorders. And she's like, she always says this, like, nutrition science is so new. Or I took Paige Smathers like nutrition class, and it was so funny because like everything she was saying, like I kind of already learned in school. I just wanted to see it through the lens of intuitive eating. And I think I had her on the podcast also. I was just saying, like, nutrition science is neutral. It's not diet culture, but we all, like you said, like when you were learning about it in 12th grade, it's like through the lens of diet culture. It's like, this is good and this is bad, but like that's not even what nutrition science is.
Right. Right. And it's also, I think something I've also been trying to capture more of the nuance of, both with individual clients, but certainly in like the writing and speaking and social media stuff that I do. And I know Paige talks a lot about this, like capturing the nuance. But specifically around how, yes, food impacts our health, but way less than we've been led to believe, right? Like there's so much healthism, like saying that like food and our individual decisions around like food and exercise are what makes or breaks our health. And that is not true. I think something, like maybe I learned about the social determinants of health in school, but like not really. And something in the last few years of just seeing how like a much larger percentage of our health is determined by things that are outside of our control, right? Like 65% are the things outside of our control. And then of the like 35-ish% that's modifiable, only like 10 to 15% of that is food and exercise. So yes, it can impact our health, but way less than we've been led to believe. And so I think, again, like taking that into perspective, I'm also thinking, I saw a post, I don't remember who, scrolling through Instagram this morning, someone writing about how the research around how people's relationships and like community and social supports is so important when we look at like longevity and mortality, and being like, yeah, so going out to eat with friends or like getting ice cream with friends actually probably quote unquote healthier for you than like sitting home and eating like chicken and vegetables. So again, I think we have to like keep all of these things in perspective. And if the way that you're eating is causing you stress and anxiety, then I wouldn't say that that's, quote unquote healthy, no matter what you're eating.
Right. And actually, I heard Brene Brown speak about this once. She was interviewed about one of her books. And I think she showed like the research that showed like the highest mortality rate in like the elderly is loneliness, which like so many people would be like, loneliness, that's not like a symptom. That's not like, that doesn't like have anything to do with like the way people die, but like it really does actually. And I don't even think Brene Brown knows about intuitive eating because she doesn't really talk about that. But when she said that, I was like, I think Brene Brown's, her research is really like up and coming and people really do believe what she says. And I was like, yes, like that's such a good, like, because so many people are obsessed with weight loss and they think like, oh, you want to get healthy, lose weight. And when she said that, I was like, that's such a different perspective, like looking at like loneliness as a factor for like health. It's so true.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So you started your own business. You were working for 6 years in a hospital. And then what led you to start your own business? Because I also have my own business and I love the business side also.
Yeah. So yes, I was working at the hospital and never expected I would be there for over 6 years. I was like, oh, maybe a year, I'll do a year or two of clinical. And then I was working at New York Presbyterian, which is a really large teaching hospital here in New York City. And just the opportunities that I got like outside of just clinical, like first of all, the clinical, I loved working in the intensive care unit. I loved the interdisciplinary team. I loved working so closely with the doctors and the pharmacists and the nurses and the speech therapists and all of that, and really feeling like I could have such a big impact on people nutrition wise. And then I got my start in doing media work there. I did a lot of TV while I was there.
How did that happen? They found you, like they just like do the
Well, because it's such a big, it's the number one hospital in New York. And so they would get, when reporters are doing news stories and they're like, I need to talk to a dietitian or I need to talk to a doctor, they always reach out to hospitals. And the PR department would then like come to my boss's boss. And so I started doing it that way. And then I ended up becoming like the media liaison for the nutrition team and doing training for the dietitians on all the different campuses. That led me to I applied and became the spokesperson first for the New York State Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. And then I was a spokesperson of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for 3 years. And it was actually when I was a spokesperson for the Academy that at the time, there was 30 of us all over the country. And not all, but a large percentage were entrepreneurs and business owners. And I really got a chance to see all the different options out there for how you can have a business as a dietitian. And I started like doing some consulting on the side, and I was just like traveling more like with the Academy and just seeing this side of nutrition that I didn't really know existed. And again, this is like the mid 2000s. And so social media was like barely a thing. It was like just kind of starting. Just getting a chance to kind of be around these people who were so inspiring and just had really amazing businesses and learning from them. And it gave me a different perspective. And then around the same time, I decided to go back to school for my master's. I was still working full-time and going part-time, but I was getting a master's in health communications. And so initially I had been thinking that I wanted to leave the hospital and work in the communications sector. And I applied for actually a lot of jobs, didn't get any of them, but applied for a lot of jobs. And then I was realizing as I was starting to do some stuff on the side and being around these people in the Academy spokesperson program, I was like, all these jobs I'm applying for, it's like one small facet of what interests me. And I'm going to be bored so quickly. At the time too, I'd been at the hospital for over 6 years. And so I was, one of the longest running team members on the nutrition team. I had a lot of autonomy. I was working in management at the time. And I was just like, I don't know if I want to start over at a new company either. So I kind of realized as I was applying for jobs, like, wait a second, to do all of these different things that interest me, I really have to work for myself. And at this point, I now had mentors and models of like what that looked like. And so that's what really got me thinking about it. And then I was like, well, how am I going to do this? I'm single, living in New York City, can't afford to like get my own insurance, don't have savings because I'm living in New York City. Wow. And then I had been talking to a friend of mine about this. And a couple of weeks later, she calls me and she was like, oh my gosh, I have the perfect job for you. And it was a part-time 20-hour-a-week corporate wellness nutrition job with full insurance benefits.
Wow.
So that was like my ticket out of the full-time world and allowed me, I worked there for a year while I was like building up my practice. So it gave me a bit of breathing room. And that was actually, 7 years ago this month.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So as you're like recounting the story, it sounds like it was a really natural progression. Like, okay, I was working here and then I met the mentors for the entrepreneurs and then the 20-hour, but while you were in it, did you feel like, because I know like for myself, like I was like, I don't know how I'm going to start this business. I didn't have any business training, entrepreneurship. Now it's changing, but I was so drawn to it. Like you said, like you'd be bored. Like there's so many things I wanted to do, but I just like the fear like of doing it. Like, did that hold you back at all?
I mean, yeah, I was thinking about it for a long time. And I think I didn't have any business training. I did not know what I was doing. Having these people that had done it before me. And even though I had a couple of close friends who had just been doing it for like a year or two, but even that was really helpful of like giving me some courage of like, okay, they're doing it, I can do this. And then if I hadn't gotten found that 20-hour a week job, I don't know what it would have looked like. Because that was just something I knew how rare that was. And again, I also had a couple of side income streams at the time that made me feel confident that I could, have a little bit of leeway for a few months while I built some stuff up. And again, I loved the hospital job, and it was at that point kind of like a cushy job since I had been there for so long. So, and oh my God, looking back now, I'm like, the insurance benefits, I didn't realize how good I had it while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
But so, yeah, I feel really grateful because I think it would have been a much harder leap if I was going from like full-time to just completely starting my own thing. And that really like did push me. Other than having like a couple side income streams coming in from a consulting standpoint, I didn't have anything set up. So I was really starting from scratch.
Well, good
and
for you. Good for
yeah,
you. It took a
lots
leap.
of business trainings and reading and all of those things the first couple of years.
Right now you're sort of like a guru, like, right. You have, I want to hear like more about like the sides of your business, but yeah, like when I was actually starting, I'm just trying to think of my timeline. Like my son's 3.5, and I was pregnant with him at the time. And I remember I was at this place where I was like, I did not like clinical. I was in nursing homes, but I was like, okay, all the stars are aligning. I have to start my own business. And then like I quit my job, and then I was like starting to show because I was pregnant. And then like so many of my own mentors were like, you should really get a part-time job. I'm like 6 months pregnant. But that is what I tell like dietitians, like just for that cushion, that like part-time. And also it's hard to structure your week when you have like nothing on your schedule. Like when you have like 3 days a week you're working and the other days are like allocated to your business, it does give you like more of like a structure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think certainly from like taking some of the financial pressure off, it's really helpful. And yeah, the structure. And it was honestly also at that job where I got really clear at, who I wanted to be working with. When I started, I was just like, I will see anyone who's going to pay me. Right. Like I had this clinical background. I was doing a lot with like tube feeding at the time. And was seeing like those like home care tube feed clients. I have like a sports nutrition background, so I was doing some of that. But there was like one specific person who I saw through my corporate wellness job, who I still remember, and the experience I had like coaching and counseling her. And this was maybe like 8 or 9 months into my job there. It was just like, this is what I feel really passionate about. And so it did, help me like from a skill perspective and to kind of narrow it down because I was seeing some one-on-one clients through my business, but that takes so long to build up. So I was able to see a lot more and really get a clearer understanding about the people that I wanted to work with through my business too. So it was helpful from that perspective for sure too.
Right. So during that year you started, I guess, how did you like advertise? How did people know about you? How did you start?
Oh my goodness. Well, let's see. So I guess like the first thing is I started developing a website. So again, at the time I was doing some consulting work. So financially I was like, okay for a couple of months. And so I had a friend of a friend help me design my first logo and website. And honestly, most of my the people I was working with and the things I was doing was through referrals. So I was seeing some one-on-one clients. I was doing some freelance writing. I was doing some corporate wellness presentations for like 2 different companies that were contracting me out. I was doing, oh my gosh, like so many different things. It's so funny when I look back at like old folders in my computer and I'm like, oh my gosh, I was spread so thin. But again, I didn't really know where I wanted my company to go. I was just trying to like keep my head afloat for that first year. And then after that first year, I decided to quit the part-time job and go full-time. And that's really when I felt like I was getting, like I had done all this business training. So I was getting more clear on that. I was, working on blogging and social media and like website, stuff and like email lists and all these different pieces. I was getting more clear on who I wanted to work with, and like niching down more. And then that was the time that, I was like, okay, things are feeling solid business-wise. Let me do some more counseling training. And then stumbled upon the intuitive eating course and like blew my whole business model up. So,
wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Meaning like you took that course and you were like, okay, now I have to change the way I counsel. Was it like that
Yeah,
instantaneously?
exactly. Exactly. And again, I felt, because the other thing I was doing is I was doing brand spokesperson work. So I was working with different brands that aligned with my values and my mission and that I liked. And that gave me the leeway. When I took that course, I was like, oh crap, like I can't keep doing this like weight loss counseling that I'm doing. And so I actually stopped taking on new clients for probably almost like 4 or 5 months, I think. And I finished out with the ones I had, which was like slightly awkward because now I'm trying to like introduce intuitive eating to them, even though they came to me for weight loss. And yeah, I relied on my other streams of income. I was still doing writing. I was working with this app, I was doing some different things. And then like revamped all of my website and my marketing messages and like all of the things and did more training because I was like, I need to learn more about this.
Were you
And
nervous
just,
that you wouldn't get like a client base?
oh yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. There was definitely a lot of feelings of scarcity and feelings of like, are people even going to do this? So this was like about 5 years ago. And at that point, I feel like intuitive eating specifically, and now like health at every size and things like that are gaining more steam and exposure in just the last couple of years. But 5 years ago, like no one was really talking about it. And I had no idea like how people were going to react to it. And again, this is where like having those different revenue streams was helpful as I like, again, tried to build up a client base, and it did take a little bit of time, but, yeah, I saw that like, oh yeah, people are tired of dieting and they are interested in trying this new way and like different way. So yeah, it worked out in the end.
Yeah, I see that. So I think I don't really know, like you said, you have a practice, you have other dietitians that work for you. You also run like some I'm blanking on the word, but like retreats, right? Like, could you talk to me a little bit about like the other aspects of your business, and was that like was that natural for you? Was that like your creative side? Was that what other dietitians were doing? Like, you must be very creative to come up with all that stuff, you know?
Well, thank you. It's funny because I have this story that I'm not creative, and it's something that I've been working on challenging the last, like specifically in 2021. So yeah, now where my business is that the kind of two focuses. So I have a consumer facing business where, like I said at the beginning, my team and I work with people both one-on-one. We also offer group programs and online trainings to people who are just feeling done with dieting, wanting to try something different. And then I also work with dietitians and clinicians who are either have a business and are looking to grow it, or who want to start a business. And so that's kind of the other side of my business right now. And that started, oh my gosh, was it I think it was 2017. Because so when I started my business, like I said, I had all these friends that I had made through the Academy spokesperson program who were running their own businesses. And at the time there was like, I mean, now there's so many different options for specifically for dietitians, but also for just other online, clinicians. But at the time there really wasn't any of that. And so I was relying on these people who I know and have been able to form these close relationships with, and like the nutrition entrepreneur practice group of the Academy. Like those were the two main things. And a former spokesperson friend of mine reached out and said, this was a couple months into me leaving the part-time job. So I've been in business myself for like a little over a year. And she said, she was out in LA, and she said, 2 girlfriends and I are going to do this like weekend retreat, just like to work on our businesses and like talk things through. Do you want to come out here? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And during that weekend, the 4 of us, like we had an outline and we had like time to work on our businesses. We had time to discuss with each other. And it was just so nice because, I mean, you probably have felt this way at points, but entrepreneurship is really lonely. And even though I have a team now, we're, all virtual. So it's still, I'm working by myself most days of the week. And just to have these people to like bounce ideas off of. Also, I'm like really good with like detailed stuff and like to-do lists and like getting all the little stuff done. I struggle to like take that step back and do longer term planning. So it was also really helpful in that way, to sort of have a specific space to do that in. And so while we were there that weekend, I said to them, I'm like, we need to do this for other dietitians. Like, this is amazing. And two of the women said, yeah, we'd love to do that. And so I kind of had penciled it in of like, okay, maybe in the fall. And then I circled back to them like 6 months later and was like, hey, are you still interested? And they're like, no, like our businesses have gone different ways, but feel free to run with the idea. And so I started offering, I was calling them dietitian entrepreneur mastermind retreats. So I was turned into doing twice a year, 2 different retreats in the spring and 2 in the fall. And I did that for a couple of years. I think I ran like 10 or 12 retreats over a couple of years.
Wow.
And then COVID happened.
Right. Yeah. COVID.
And so, at this point I have and then I got my book deal. So then I was writing my book. And so I kind of put that part of the business on the back burner for a bit and actually am now kind of bringing it back out. So I did create in 2020, obviously saw a need, like all these dietitians were now virtual, some lost their jobs, and we're just like trying to figure out like, oh, this is a chance for me to start my business. So I created a self-paced online course, the Dietitian Entrepreneur Foundation course, which walks people through like all the nuts and bolts of starting their business, like all those things that took me like several years to really put all together. And then what I'm working on now, because I do a little bit of one-on-one business coaching for weight inclusive clinicians and providers, but really what in the last couple of years, I've been participating in some different group programs, like business kind of programs. And I really want to create something, and this is what I'm working on now to hopefully launch in the spring, to create a longer term group program that's like part business building, part social justice, part weight inclusive care, and also part like that, just connecting with others and having that like self-care piece as a business owner and as an entrepreneur and as a, mental health clinician. And so that's really the next step, is I've been running a group program for, kind of my, the people who are trying to let go of dieting. And now I want to take some of that material and start, kind of training dietitians more, but also working into it, like the business aspect as well.
Wow. That's a lot of things. And like you said, like you're not creative, like you're struggling with that story of like not being creative. Like it sounds like you're really good at finding like what's missing in the intuitive eating, nutrition, entrepreneur space and being like, hey, like I needed that help and now I can help others. Like that's like, isn't that what they say about like the mother of invention is necessity, right?
Yeah. And thank you. It's something that, again, it's all kind of sort of seemingly stars aligned happening, but yeah, I mean, I think that has kind of been it of like, oh, well, no one's doing it or no one's doing it just like this. Cause I think, and what I love about this community, like the weight inclusive community, is that people are so supportive and there are some like amazing trainings out there now, business trainings and weight inclusive trainings. And I refer people to those all the time, but yeah, it's creating something. I mean, it was the same with my book. It's like, okay, there's so many great books out there, but like, I want to write one that's like, encompasses the things that I feel like aren't all together in these books. And so it's kind of the same thing with these different programs of like, okay, if I could like wave a magic wand and design something that I would find helpful, and in talking to people in the community would find helpful, what would I put in there?
Right. That's amazing. And I do hear a lot of like, maybe I'm wrong and you can correct me, but like confidence, like, or like not the scarcity mindset, like the abundance mindset. Like I know for myself, for other dietitians who are in this space, they're just so scared. I know actually for myself, when I really started working on my business, like every day, like I would set aside time, was when I had to during COVID, because we were all in quarantine and I'm married with 3 kids. So my husband had to work for 3 hours. So I'm like, okay, well then I have to work for 3 hours because I'm not watching the kids by myself all day. And that's just me. It was way too much. And so that 3 hours was like, okay, so like I'm not seeing clients at that time. So what should I be doing? And that because I had those 3 hours built in, it was accountability for me. But like it sounds like maybe you're just like, what is it? Are you naturally good at it? Or you just had a vision, like, or I'm just missing that part because like I'm just listening to the story, you know?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. I consider myself like a recovering type A. I think I'm, in many ways, the like quote unquote, stereotypical first child of just like, and I get so much of this from my mother, who was like hyper organized and just like on top of everything. And that is just, I think part of it's how my brain works and part of it is how I was raised. And that is just my default. Like that's just, and I've been working to undo some of that because it was my default, but also to detriment. It was like unhelpful in a lot of ways where I was like very rigid with things and not good for my mental health. And so the last decade or so, I've been working on just being able to be more flexible. But yeah, I think from a business perspective, yeah, I'm super organized. I'm like really good with all the details. It's a little bit of a, there's like this line that I'm always sort of navigating around, doing new things like launching this new program. But also I learned through working for myself that I hate time-bound stuff because it just stresses me out. So I love it when there's like nothing super time bound. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to work on this week from this multitude of things? Now it's not realistic to have a business that's like never anything time bound. Right.
Right.
But yeah, that just has informed how I work. And also I think too, I had to get out of that mentality that, I think is certainly in the culture that we live in here in the US, but also in a lot of the business circles of just like, 6 figures and then going for 7 figures and always growing every year. And I had to like step back and be like, wait, but what do I want? And what's important, for my life? Because at the end of the day, I started a business, partly because I was interested in doing these different things, but also partly because I wanted more flexibility in my life. So if I'm just creating this business that's replicating like a 9 to 5, what good is that doing?
Right.
So yeah, really thinking more about my values and balancing, wanting to support people and wanting to do interesting things and be around people while also, yeah, what do I want my life to look like? And how can the work that I'm doing like be in service to that as well?
It sounds like I always say this about intuitive eating, like intuitive living, like you said, like, well, I could always keep growing my business, but then like, well, part of, I wanted to be more flexible. I wanted my schedule to be more flexible. So I have to take a step back. And that's like, or like, I know I want to hear about your book. Like I was reading some of the things you sent me, that the book is a lot about like unlearning. So like for you see like a recovering type A or somebody who's very rigid, you're like learning about flexibility. That sounds like that's like very much in line with your values and what you work on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the unlearning piece, and that's a big theme, like you mentioned in my book, is the book is really around like unlearning diet culture and all the ways in which these anti-fat beliefs are present within us and all around us, because of the culture that we're in. And the last couple of years, I've also been learning more about just how the roots of that diet culture, which is rooted in white supremacy and in colonialism and in racism, and then how that impacts, yes, it impacts our relationship with food in our bodies, but it also impacts, our, perfectionism and binary thinking and all of these different things. And so, yeah, there's so much overlap I've been realizing between like diet culture and how this shows up with food and bodies and how we show up like in all other areas of our life. So yeah, so much of it is just this like being aware of like, oh wait, what is this belief that I have that's informing what I'm feeling right now? And then unlearning that of like, okay, is this me or is this something I was taught? And really trying to just like peel back all the layers. I mean, in so many ways, like it feels like I'm just like, okay, who was I as a child and how can I get back there? Because we're just, for so many reasons, like so many different things kind of pile up on top of us. And I feel like I'm now trying to peel back all those layers. And it started with the food and body piece, but now is going into like all these different areas too.
Totally. So tell us about your book. How did that come to be? Did you always want to write a book? And it's called Unapologetic Eating. How did that come to be? Walk us through that.
I mean, I think in the back of my head, I do enjoy writing. And so I think in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, it'd be cool to write a book someday, but it wasn't, I didn't have it like in a goal anytime soon. And then I was actually approached by a publisher who found my work online, and they were a publisher traditionally of like diet books and cookbooks. And then one of their executives had read about intuitive eating a couple of years ago and was like, wow, this is so interesting. This makes so much sense. And then they decided they wanted to start publishing some books in that area. And so they reached out to me. I honestly almost didn't respond to the email because I thought it was just a junk email.
But I can relate to that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's like you get so much just like BS email that's like not real. I did respond luckily and got on a call with them, and they're just like, have you ever wanted to write a book? And like, what would you write about? And I just kind of said like the first thing that came to my mind. I hadn't thought about this much, but obviously I think it had kind of like been in there. Right. And I said to the person on the call, I was like, well, the part that I love most about working with my clients is how they come to me with like this quote unquote, like struggle with food. And then we work on that, but through our work together, it impacts all different areas of their life. And so I really wanted to write like a book that captured that. And they were like, great. And I mean, they honestly, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, but they just let me run with it. And so I did a lot of brainstorming and decided I wanted to write this like broad spectrum book that, like we talked about earlier, covered all these different areas that I've learned from so many different people, but to really put them into one book. And to show people how unlearning diet culture and making peace with food transforms not just your relationship with food and yourself, but like all these other things. And so, yeah, I started that process. I didn't have a title when I was starting out. And I sent them like an outline. And then I think they had seen like maybe 1 or 2 chapters at that point. And I got an email from the publisher and they said, so we've been brainstorming some book ideas. And the top one that's come out of our office is Unapologetic Eating. What do you think about that? And now, I mean, I immediately loved it. I, of course, like did some more thinking and like got feedback from a lot of people, but it's so funny because then I realized that like in my Instagram bio and probably somewhere on my website, I had been kind of using the word unapologetic. Like I just kind of started using that. And I don't even remember like where that came from or like how that happened, but I had that like a couple places. So I think that's where they saw it, and then kind of seeing what I had sent them so far. And then, yeah, it just made it really, as I started to like think about it more, it made so much sense because, yeah, unapologetic eating to me is like eating what you want, when you want, how you want, without feeling guilty, without feeling ashamed, without feeling worried about what other people are thinking. It's just like enjoying yourself with food and like being in the moment and like fully inhabiting your body. Without feeling self-conscious or like worrying about anything, just like being present in the moment and being connected to yourself. And really with that, it was like, okay, it's about like I just said before, peeling back the layers, getting back to the roots of like who you were before society put all these things on you. And funny aside story is that was 2020. So it's like the summer, we decided on that title. A few months later, I came across a journal that I kept. I had been at a retreat in 2019 and I was like, oh, I haven't looked at that journal since 2019. It's like, I remember we did some cool like brainstorming exercises and I had some different ideas. I don't remember what they were. So I start reading through the journal, and this is 2019. This is before the publisher had reached out. I had not thought about writing a book at all. I pull open the like 3 ideas I'd come up with during that retreat that I had honestly completely forgotten about. And one of them was a book and a podcast called Unapologetic Eating.
No way.
Yes.
Really?
And I'm like not one of those people that's like, I mean, I've been getting more into this, but like the idea of like manifesting, I'm like, yeah, whatever. And I'm like, holy wow. Like I totally did. Like that was in me. And then I promptly forgot about it. And then like in this book, and then the whole thing was really wild, but
that's crazy.
Yeah, that's kind of how that all came about.
I think that that's just a really cool story, but also like inspirational for me and for listeners. Cause like, I think that, did you read the book Feel the Fear and Do It Anyways by Susan Jeffers? It's a really good book.
I've heard of it.
It's a great book. I just reread it. I was talking about it a lot on my Instagram. Like your story to me is like, it's portraying a lot of like fearlessness. Like you had this vision, you had this goal, you had this idea, you learned about, like some people learn about intuitive eating and they're like, nah, like it just can't be. Like there's just too many people I know on a diet, but you're like, maybe you didn't even realize this, but you're just like, no, this makes sense. Like this is true. I've seen this in my practice. I've seen it in myself. Like I'll just go with it. Like I think some people do struggle to, and I've heard this from dietitians who've been like, I do believe in intuitive eating, but it won't sell. So I'll just do weight loss. And I'm like, really? Like you'll just like live like on a totally different like value system. And like, they're like, yeah, like I'll make money, whatever. And I totally get that. I'm not like against those people. Like they want to support their family. They don't believe in things strongly in general, whatever. But I think that like through the intuitive eating process, which led me to like, business coaches and the concept of manifesting and the concept of abundance mindset, like, especially because of that story you just told, like it's somewhere in there that like you see a vision, you see like a dream, you see like something missing in the world and you're like, I got to do that, like even you wrote it in your journal,
Yeah. And I think so much of like the last couple of years has been realizing of just like trusting that process and not feeling like, okay, now I got to like set goals and figure out how to do it. And like, this idea for the dietitian program has been brewing for like a couple of years. And I'm like, I'll know when the right time is. And like, just kind of like circling back to it. And so I think that's also, I mean, and that's come from being in business, from just like, honestly, my growth, less as a business owner and more as just like a human in the last couple of years, and just kind of trusting of like, yeah. And, again, I have a lot of privilege in so many ways and, do have like the financial privilege to be able to be like, okay, like my business is good as it is. And I can sort of like know when I want to go into different areas and just, being in business now for this long, like seeing those cycles and how they come around and of like, okay, there's going to be months where there's not as many people coming in, but that's normal. And it always comes back around, and just kind of having that confidence to just like keep going, which is always, easier and some points and harder at others. But yeah, just kind of building that confidence in myself and in the business, and yeah, just trying to do things that feel good and that feel right and doesn't feel like I'm pushing it, or doing this from the scarcity lens, especially as diet culture preys on scarcity too, right? And so it's like the same kind of thing in our culture of certainly through my marketing, like not wanting to do that to people and being rethinking a lot of that. Because so much of like the traditional business training, it's like a scarcity based one, right? So yeah, I think just over the years, and I would say it's never that I'm not fearless. There's always fear and anxiety of like, what if no one signs up? What if no one wants to do this?
Yeah, totally.
But you do it anyway. And it's like, okay, if no one signs up, then I revamp and I try something different. So.
Right. It's definitely giving me a lot of motivation, inspiration, because like even like some days you see like a lull in your business and you're like, oh, nobody cares about me. Like we come up with these stories like, no one wants intuitive eating, nobody likes me, nobody whatever, and like then you just feed that and you're just stop creating content or you don't feel inspired versus like that, I guess, mindfulness piece or that abundance mindset of like, it will come when it will come, or the right time will be when it will be. And like, maybe I just need to get quiet. Like I have to stop being like busying myself to just be busy. Like, just like the culture that we live in sort of promotes.
Right. Right. And I think too, not or delinking my value as a human to how my business performs. I think that was really big for me too. And this was just a couple of years ago. I was in a supervision session with Fiona Sutherland, who's incredible. And I was having this like, this was fall of 2019 actually. And I was like having this panic of like, okay, you know, I had really like, what's the word I'm looking for? I had like attached myself to this label of like intuitive eating dietitian. And then I felt like, okay, I'm doing so much more than that, but I don't know how to explain that to people. And like, I know that it's more than that, but like I was like having this like existential crisis. And what Fiona said to me was, amongst other things, one of the things I remember her saying to me then was talking about like getting super grounded in my values. Because when I'm super grounded in my values, and this is for everybody, right? When you're like super grounded in your values and who you are as a human, when other stuff comes and like hits you, yes, there's still going to be ones that can like affect you, but you're not attaching to it as much. And it's sort of, this is also something Marcy Evans, someone else I've done supervision with, said to me of just like, you know, you learn how to filter whose feedback you do need to listen to and whose you can be like, nope, like, and just really getting a better sense of that. And no matter what, right? And I think this for me too, in the last, like since 2020 with kind of like the racial uprisings happening. And I think I've gotten a lot better at being able to take feedback and take some not so good feedback without being like, oh, I'm a bad person. Something is wrong with me. Right.
Totally.
And without getting like defensive, because that totally limits our growth as humans and as professionals and as clinicians. And so, yeah, I think that's been a lot of it, is like not linking how a program does or feedback I get to like my worth and value as a human.
Totally. And I'm actually like on my list of things to do. I really want to take Fiona's course on trauma-informed nutrition. So like, yeah, I'm also like, should I not? So I know I've heard her name many, many times.
So good.
Yeah.
I take anything Fiona does, I sign up for basically. I did her, she and Marcy have the body image training that I did like when it first came out a couple of years ago. And since that was my first introduction to actually both of their work. And since then I basically sign up for anything Fiona does because it's always amazing.
Okay. Good to know. Maybe we'll bring her on the podcast next.
Yeah. She's great.
Okay. So thanks so much for coming on. Any last words, or can you share where listeners could find you and your work?
Sure. Yeah. So my website is alissarumsey.com. My book is called Unapologetic Eating. There's information on my website about it. It's also available anywhere books are sold. And then you can also find me over on Instagram at Alissa Rumsey RD.
Okay, awesome. I'm going to put all that in the show notes so people could easily find you. Your amazing work.
Thanks you.
So much for coming on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Sure, it was amazing. Really amazing.
Thank you.